Okay, should we get started? All right. So good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to everyone in the room and those who might be joining us online. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's talk on African hair as art, self-expression, and resistance. My name is Nicola Singh. I'm an assistant professor of history and chair of the History and Political Science Department here at Albertus Magnus College. And it is my sincere pleasure to be sharing the stage with my very able co-panelists, Ms. Nkenge Hook, Ms. Nickey Kollie, Mr. Joe Glenn, and of course, our very own Dr. Patricia Birungi. I'm sorry if I butchered any of your names. I thought as the in-house historian, I should begin tonight's talk with a little bit of hair history. Yeah. And so I will be speaking briefly and broadly on hair expressions in pre-colonial Africa and post-colonial North America. I say briefly to acknowledge that to speak about hair expression, we cannot begin to cover the breadth and depth of this topic in 1 or 2 hours. So that's why I say I'm going to speak briefly about it. And I say broadly to acknowledge that to speak about hair expression in Africa is to acknowledge that Africa is a continent, not a country, that Africans, African Americans, and Africans in the diaspora are not a homogeneous or monolithic group. But it's always important to remember that each of us are as unique as our fingerprint, and that goes for the African diaspora as well. With that said, I thought I would just speak very generally to introduce the topic of hair expression in pre-colonial Africa. And just to state the obvious a little bit, Africans have been styling their hair from time immemorial, right? Ancient African styles have been preserved in stone reliefs, in wood, metal, and clay sculptures, and in jewelry that survived. Locked hair and braids are only two of the many styles that predate colonial involvement in Africa. But there are also styles like twisting, braiding, cotton, or wool thread weaving. All existed and predate colonial Europeans' arrival in Africa. In many of these styles that survived, the African hair were accessorized with cowrie shells, fine and fat beads, with jewelry, including ringlets, and in some cases, animal fossils, right? Very stylized here. In pre-colonial Africa, one's hair indicated one's age, one's gender identity, one's social and economic status, one's tribal affiliation, right? One marital status. So when you saw someone, right, their hair indicated if they were a king, a queen, a chief, a priestess, a prophet, a warrior, maybe a wife, or a youth who was about to be initiated into adulthood. In their early encounters with Africans, Europeans mentioned not only the uniqueness of African skin, but also the stunning and stylized way in which they wore their hair. But of course, we know following the enslavement of Africans en masse, stylized hair almost vanished. So the second thing to disappear after Africans lost their freedom was their hair. Chopping the hair of the enslaved to its roots was supposedly done for hygienic reasons, that is to prevent hair lices, right? But we all can acknowledge that hair is more than hygiene. Hair humanizes us, whereas slavery dehumanizes us. Hair, especially stylized hair, speaks to our identity, our individuality, and our human dignity, whereas slavery strips us of those things. Slavery strips us of identity. It strips us of individuality and human dignity. In the simplest form, slavery is about objectification of the human body. As commodities to be bought and sold, slaves were stripped of their humanity and ultimately their hair. So basically, a slave with elaborate or even styled hair was an impossibility, right? Because an object forced to work does not seek to set him or herself apart by styling his or her hair. Styling one's hair takes time, but time is money in a capitalist regime. Stylized hair speaks of intimacy and community, but in shattering the humanity of the enslaved, slavery made it difficult to forge and to maintain ties of humanity and community. However, we know that there were exceptions. As I started to say, we are as unique as our fingerprints, and the slave experience was also unique from plantation to plantation. We know that some slaves continued to style their hair, and we found this evidence in, of all things, advertisement that were for runaway slaves. So they would describe the slave, and then sometimes they would have a description that the slave had stylized hair. So we found that evidence. But also we know that slave had one day off, sometimes part of a day off, and that was Sunday. And on Sundays, they washed, combed, and braided each other's hair, then wrapped it in a coarse cloth, which protected the hair and kept it clean for the rest of the week. So slaves were always finding ways to express themselves through hair. Also in North America, we know that slaves are banned, and most slaves are banned from styling their hair. But did you know that also free people of color were also banned from stylizing their hair because it offended white sensibility? So for example, in Louisiana, free Blacks a law was passed called the Tignon Law, which said that free Blacks could not style their hair or wear their stylized hair in public. And they forced African women particularly to wear cover their head in cloth, and they protested or responded by covering their hair with very bright colored, very decorative headscarves that they then not just covered the hair, but then put it in big bows and so, you know, you can try to crush they were always trying to crush the African American experience, but African Americans were always, you know, fighting against that and trying to express themselves beyond that. After the abolition of slavery, the straight hair rule began to take effect because for hundreds of years, Africans had internalized the negative remarks that was made about the texture of their hair. So the straight rule simply is this: straight hair is not just beautiful, but straight hair is more beautiful than natural African coiled and curled hair. Now that African Americans were free to style their hair, many of them felt compelled to straighten their hair in order to participate in, excuse me, in the white social hierarchy, in white hegemonic culture, in white businesses, and places of employment and politics. You see, in dominant white patriarchal culture, straight is beautiful. Straight hair, straight noses, straight androgynous uncurvy bodies, and all kinds of straight heteronormative presentations are privileged, preferred, and permitted in public spaces. So African Americans felt compelled to conform in order to participate, even partially, in the broader American experience. Straightened hair involved, insofar as that it involved pressing and chemically treating African American textured hair, meant in some way a negation of Black identity and naturalness. In the 1960s, as part of the larger Pan-African decolonization, negritude, and Black is Beautiful movements, some African Americans began to encourage the community to return to their natural roots. But white patriarchal America took offense. African American natural hair disrupted the status quo. It was seen as subversive and political, a rejection of white dominant culture. African American natural hair seemed to work against white beauty standards. It upheld African American identity and pride, and it allowed African Americans to positively reinforce their Blackness. Around the 1980s, relaxed hair once again became popular. That is, chemically relaxed hair once again became popular. But today, weaves, extension, hair coloring, as well as natural hairstyles, including braids and locks, are common. Still, in our current day, I mean, in 2023, there's a respectability politics surrounding hair. Straight hair gets you some level of respectability. It might also contribute to you getting a job, or not having straight hair might contribute to you not getting a job. In some ways, straight hair is a passport. It can take you places maybe that natural hair can't. On the contrary, natural hair is sometimes criminalized. In some states in our country, natural hair is criminalized. And in December, this past December 14, 2022, Republican senators blocked the passage of the Crown Act, which begs the question, why is banning natural hair controversial? In 2023, African hair continues to be policed in ways that African American bodies and communities are policed. And tonight, we're here to ask the question, why? Why? Okay, so also because I'm serving as a moderator, I'm going to, if you have questions for me, please save them to the end because I want to introduce our next panelist, who is our Dr. Birungi. And she is a professor and director of the Master of Public Administration program here at Albertus Men's College. Which is good. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. As my colleague Nicola Singh, Dr. Singh mentioned, I am the MPA program director. But this evening, this is a topic that is close to my heart. I'm passionate about things Black and anything that oppresses Black people. It's very close to my heart in a sense. So when she approached me to be a part of this panel, I was honored, but also I could feel the responsibility for what I had to say today. So for my part of the discussion, I'll be discussing the Afro and dreadlocks as forms of resistance in the African American community and the larger African diaspora. So Dr. Singh did mention a lot, touched a little bit about the resistance aspect of Afros, of African American hair or Black hair in general. But we know that from what she mentioned, that one of the first offenses against enslaved Africans when they were stolen or kidnapped from Africa was to cut their hair. And while it was supposedly done for hygienic purposes, what it really served to do was strip them of their identity, to strip them of their culture, and strip them of even their sense of humanity, because we know that during that time, the racist ideology that Black people were less than human was the norm at that time. So really that was one of the purposes for cutting enslaved Africans' hair. So fast forward to some of the earliest accounts of the use of hair as forms of resistance, detail tales of enslaved Africans in South America who used intricate forms of braid patterns to communicate with each other, routes and plans of escape. So they did this with their hair. They did not just lay back and be like, hey, you know, this is our, this is what, you know, what we've been given, what we've been dealt. They resisted using their hair. They braided patterns and communicated using their hair. And that is one of the earliest tales of resistance using hair. Another tale, in addition to that, actually, once they braided their hair, they also used to braid beads or seeds and gold within their braids to help them survive along the way as they escaped. And another tale was something that Dr. Singh touched on, was the resistance that women of Creole descent used in New Orleans in response to that Tignon Law of 1786 actually. So they resisted in that way, although they complied with the law, because I mean, it was the law in New Orleans that they had to cover their heads. They did so in a way that still upheld their identity, in a way that still upheld their style and their fashion. And that was another form of resistance. Fast forward to way past emancipation, way to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. We see, as Dr. Singh mentioned, a resurgence, or not even a resurgence, because it was a new appreciation of Black hair, of everything Black. And we see the Afro especially come up as a symbol of identity, as a symbol of Black power, as a symbol of Black pride. And we might be familiar with the images of Angela Davis rocking her Afro and being a powerful Black leader. We also have images of Black Panther member and law professor Kathleen Cleaver, who stated that we wear our hair in an afro, because she had an afro at that point, and a lot of Black people were wearing afros. We wear our hair as in an afro because there's a new awareness that our natural physical appearance is beautiful and pleasing to us. It doesn't have to be beautiful and pleasing to everyone else, but we're aware at that moment. Black people became aware that at that moment, their natural physical beauty was beautiful to them. And in that way, they were resisting the racist ideals that proximity to whiteness was best, or that was the standard of beauty. And they used their hair to do that. When it comes to locks or dreadlocks, I still can't get my parents to call them locks, because no one really calls them dreadlocks right now. But yeah, we'll still work on that. But in terms of locks, historically, locks were more than a style. They were a spiritual expression, they were an attitude, they were a lifestyle that inspired both passion and disapproval from the mainstream. The Rastafari movement started in Jamaica in the 1930s, inspired by visionary Marcus Garvey, who championed the idea of Black pride and the return to Africa movement. Rastafarianism itself was a religion that is a religion that gets some of its roots from the Bible, and early Rastas at that time, because they wanted to emulate the Nazarites in the Bible, decided to keep their hair, not cut their hair. And in that way, they adopted dreadlocks as a tradition of that movement. But that their adoption of dreadlocks also went along with their natural lifestyle. They were vegan, vegetarians, they were into everything natural. And also it served as a means or as a symbol of resistance against what they considered the evils of white power, the evil of whiteness and its ideal of beauty. So that is how they were able to resist in that way. But beyond Jamaica, we know that there's plenty of examples of individuals or tribal groups that wore dreadlocks. We have the Himbu of Namibia and Angola. We have the Samburu and the Masi of Kenya and the Igbo of Nigeria. So dreadlocks were not confined to Jamaica. But at the same time, as they rose to popularity, we had images of individuals, of rebels in Africa. For example, the Mau Mau of Kenya, images of them rebelling against colonialism, and they happened to wear dreadlocks. So those images were ingrained in the eyes of the public in the Western world, and then dreadlocks were associated. That kind of cemented the association of dreadlocks to rebellion and resistance, in a sense. But with the rise of reggae in general and Bob Marley and the Wailers in particular, Rastafari movement was spread across the world, especially the Western world, and thousands of people listened to the music. They appreciated the music, but we all know, if we have listened to the old school reggae, that it carried a message. It was more than the music. It carried a message of resisting colonialism, resisting the masters. So while people listened, they also adopted the lifestyle, the messaging, they internalized the messaging. And this came out in expressions of rebellion, even in the Western world. And for young people, when they when they listen to music and like it, they end up adopting some of the lifestyle. So you'd see a lot of young people rocking locks as well. And predictably, this was met with hostility from the mainstream society, because in spite of Awera's motives, dreadlocks or locks make a bold statement. And one can argue even right now, they do make a bold statement, even though someone has no motive or political motive associated with wearing them. So fast forward to the last 10 years, as Dr. Singh has alluded to, there's been an increased awareness of the dangers of relaxers. And with this increased awareness has given a rise to a sort of natural renaissance among women, especially Black women. Black women are ditching relaxers and adopting more healthy protective hairstyles, such as twists, locks, braids, and even weaves, because weaves can be protective hairstyles. So the natural hair movement has paved the way to redefining what it means to be beautiful and what it means to be professional, because we are in the workplace. By embracing our natural hair, we're embracing our identity that was that colonialism, that racism, that slavery tried to take away. We're embracing that identity and honoring our stories as well. So embracing our natural hair indicates that we are becoming less and less interested in conforming to the mainstream ideologies of beauty that have considered, as Dr. Singh said, long, flowy hair to be good and beautiful, while kinky and coily hair is considered ugly and bad. But as Dr. Singh mentioned, the tradition of Afrocentric hairstyles is still subject to discrimination and policed in schools and in workplaces. Examples of systematic resistance because our hair is still being policed, we've had to get into the mindset that we have to resist systematically. And some examples of this systematic resistance include an example of Sergeant Jasmine Jacobs, who spearheaded the reverse of the US Army's ban on natural hairstyles in 2014. At that time, the US Army had a regulation with a list of unauthorized hairstyles. And on this list included twists and dreadlocks and a lot of hairstyles that people of color, that Black people wore. So she spearheaded the movement that reversed and revised this rule. And that was her form of resistance. Another form of resistance, as Dr. Singh has mentioned, is the Crown Act. It was created to ensure protection against discrimination based on race-based hairstyles by extending the statutory protection to hair texture and protective styles such as braids, locks, and knots, and twists in the workplace and in school. So this is another form of systematic resistance against the racist ideology that's Eurocentric hair is better than Afrocentric hair. And on an individual level, individuals such as myself, although when I decided to, get into the natural movement or transition my hair into natural, I wasn't doing it as a political statement at all. I was doing it as a health. I was motivated by my health in a sense. I wanted to be healthier, adopted healthy eating, and I figured, hey, why shouldn't my hair, take on that healthy lifestyle as well? Plus, as I mentioned, we were hearing all these reports of the dangers of relaxers. So, but while those are the motives, those might be the motives on an individual level, in a sense, individuals who decide to transition to the natural hair, or Black women or Black people who decide to transition into natural hair, in a sense, we are resisting that socialization that Eurocentric hair is better, long, flowy hair is better than our own hair. That is our own individual form of resistance, in a sense. And going back to, embracing our identity and embracing our natural selves and knowing that we are enough and we are beautiful, and allowing ourselves to lead society in a sense, to accept that sense of beauty. And we've seen those changes go beyond hair to body positivity, where that sense, that ideology of beauty is shifting to more full-figured or more normal bodies than the ones we've seen in magazines where everyone has to be a size 1. That is unrealistic, but we are leading that charge because it really affects us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Birungi. We will open the floor now for questions for Patricia. Thank you so much. Throw them at her, she can handle it. Questions? I have a question. Can you just, I think for some people, they don't know that you sometimes said locks and then you said dreadlocks. Can you explain why that is a difference now?
I don't think it is. I think it's more of calling it dreadlocks is more of an old school term. Plus, there's nothing dreadful about locks, right? So why are they called dreadlocks? Maybe a Rastafarian may, have another perspective. But to me, there's nothing dreadful about locks. So why are we calling them dreadlocks? And the term dreadlocks is associated with again, rebellion, with resistance, and even with stereotypical ideas of, maybe unkempt Rastafarians who do not come there and they don't wash their hair. That is not the case. So the term has definitely shifted over the years as locks have become more acceptable and more mainstream.
Okay, anyone else?
Yes.
I wanted to know if in East Africa, whether in East Africa, this movement of resistance doesn't exist because it's not necessary, or whether it has been, it has made itself felt across the sea and across the continent.
Well, it has been slow, which is surprising, but not. So the whole natural hair movement is really big in the United States and Western countries among people of African descent or the African diaspora, but at home, because I go home every Christmas, I'm from Uganda, it has been slow because again, that whole racist socialization is still deep. We were socialized to think that straight hair was better. And that is still ingrained in people at home. And it's slow moving. Now, what's really shifting the needle is the health aspects of relaxers, the dangers that we see in the news, like there's science to show them these methods of straightening our hair and they're dangerous. So that is shifting the needle faster. In fact, even in my family, I had to convince people, ladies in my family, I had to tell them, hey, look, this is actually dangerous. This is not just a lifestyle choice. This is something you need to think about for your health.
Thank you.
Just to piggy off what Dr. B said, I'm Liberian and I go home in December too. I go to West Africa, sometimes Liberia, sometimes Ghana. And it is a big issue there because sometimes they are still trying to be accepted in a Western, like for the most part, it doesn't even just end with hair, it's also with skin color. When you go in lots of places in Africa, bleaching is very prevalent there, which is also very dangerous and has so many different health effects. And so they still have this idea that lighter is better, straighter is better. And that concept, I think also education plays a big role in that because they don't have these systems that are teaching them that, hey, it is okay to be Black. It is okay to have curly, coily hair, so also it just there needs to be that outreach. For instance, Nigeria is one of the countries that just banned advertising of white or lighter models. So it's like, if they're not Nigerian, if they're not dark, if they're not brown, that they're going to stop advertising because majority of the people in the country are Black people. So why are you advertising white people, to our people? So those are just parts of the things where education also needs to be expanded so that they have that understanding.
And it doesn't help that we live in a neo-colonialist society, and that's huge at home. So while mainstream colonialism may have ended, there's still a lot of influence. The Western world has a huge influence, especially socially, with what goes on at home. What's considered cool, what's considered nice is still very much associated with the Western.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
So you were talking about kinky hair and coarse hair and how it's perceived as less beautiful. See, when I was growing up, it was the opposite, right? So I was growing up around dark-skinned brothers and sisters. So, they would always refer to my hair as good hair, and I took that as the ultimate insult. I wanted, seriously, especially in the 80s, you got the big flat top haircuts, that's what I wanted my hair to do that, and it would not, so I joined the military. They gave me a haircut that'll work for me. But my question is, you had mentioned that the Nazarites had locks. I didn't know that. Could you elaborate just a little bit?
Yeah, so that that is part of the Rastafarian traditional belief. They adopted locks because they wanted to emulate the Nazarites. The Nazarites in the Bible, if I remember my Bible correctly, would not cut their hair. Like God had commanded them not to cut their hair for their entire lives. They were set apart, and they were not supposed to have a razor touch their head. So in emulation of that, the earlier Rastas decided to keep their hair long. And for them, what happened is that their hair locked. So it's not necessarily that the Nazarites had locks, but they're just, they kept their hair because that's what God told them to do.
For anyone who doesn't recognize the term Nazarites, you might have recognized the story of Samson. So
Yes.
that's what she's referring to. Any other questions? Okay, let me introduce our next speaker. Ms. Nickey Kollie is a first-generation Liberian American. She currently serves as the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Connecticut Energy Marketers Association, which is a nonprofit trade association representing liquid fuel retailers throughout the state of Connecticut. Ms. Kollie also holds an MPA degree from Albertus Magnus College, so she's one of ours, guys. She will speak tonight on the current repression of African-American hairstyles in schools and places of work. Please make her welcome. You can go to the podium.
Oh, great. Wow. Wow. Unfortunately, I don't have notes and all of that stuff, so I'm just gonna be up here and speak. Thank you, Dr. B, for having me, and Dr. Singh. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak. I will say at first, when I was asked, I was a bit hesitant because it's a rough topic. As you can see, like I wear my hair straight right now, right? So I have personally adopted a more Eurocentric look, right? So at first when I was asked, I'm just like, am I really the right person to speak about, African hair in the workplace? But then I had to think about my history and how I've gotten to this point and the reason why I decided to wear my hair in Eurocentric hairstyles. I am the Director of Legislative Affairs, so I work in politics. I am on TV sometimes. Sometimes you can find me on Channel News 8 or in other public spaces, whereas I've had the mind that I needed to be accepted in a certain light to be able to get somewhere in my career. That was something that I conditioned myself to believe, or I was conditioned to believe. And it started from a young age. I'll go back in my own history. And I remember as a kid, I always wore a lot of braided hairstyle, and my parents would put beads on the end of my hair. So I had beads and they were clink clack all the time. And I remember one of the teachers asked my parents to stop putting beads in my hair because it was a distraction in the classroom. And so that was the beginning of the conditioning that I need to be less loud. I need to be quieter. I need to be acceptable. I need to be manageable in a sense, and my experience in the workplace when it comes to hair hasn't been as horrid as some of the stories you may see in the media. As you know, in 2021, Connecticut passed the Crown Act, which was to promote no discrimination of hair in the workplace. And California was actually the first state to implement that law in 2019. So there were strides and there was opposition. I'm like, oh, why do we need a law? Who's bothering? Who cares? But it actually is a thing. It is a thing where people are, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but they are bothered by representation sometimes. I know there have been cases that we've seen in the media where, kids on sports teams are getting their hair cut. Someone that has locks, they're shaving their heads on the court, or they're being told to play a sport that you have to cut your hair. And it's just like, it makes you think, why? How is this bothering? How is this affecting the game? How is this affecting the sport? And we have to, again, go back to what Dr. B said, where it comes to representation and our individual ways of expressing ourselves, and it's suppressing that. And so it becomes difficult for someone like me to disassociate myself from what I was conditioned to believe. I've gone on my own journey where I'm just like, you know what, maybe I'm gonna start wearing my natural hair more. And I've done it, and in my job, they actually get excited when I do different things to my hair. They're like, oh my God, one of my colleagues called me a chameleon, because every day you might expect a different wig, a different color, a different texture, but it's the way I express myself. and it makes me feel good. I like to be unexpected these days. I have learned that I can accept myself. I actually cut my natural hair recently, and at first I was natural. I mean, not natural. I was afraid because I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone is gonna look at me crazy because now I have this short afro, and it's not something that I was comfortable in myself doing, because again, that conditioning to believe that, hey, if I have longer flowing hair, it will be less noticeable. It wouldn't bother anyone. No one would be distracted by how I look. And so those are just, going back to the theme of conditioning and setting yourself aside, breaking away from the history of being quiet, being unseen, allowing yourself to be who you want to be and express yourself, whether it be in, your clothes, your gender identity, your hair, all of those are very important aspects of, just moving society forward. And, I will say that, unfortunately, it still exists where in the workplace, people are discriminated. I have a friend that works at Yale, actually, and she had her hair in afro. She transitioned to natural, and her supervisor was just like, would you be willing to go tidy up your hair in the bathroom? And it's like, how do you tidy up an afro? What's untidy about it? And it's just like, you want to ask those questions because it's, sometimes people don't see it, how offensive it could be, especially when it's not your experience, but it is. And even like when you walk into the workplace, having braids. So if I go in with long braids and asking, can I touch your hair? It's so weird, guys. Don't do it. And it's okay to have interest. I'm not saying don't ask questions or don't be curious, but there's a certain level, there's boundaries, whereas like I can't just go up to someone and start touching them. That's awkward. So my hair is not, it's not an artifact. It's not, something to be really studied, or it's my identity. So if you wouldn't go up and touch any other part on somebody's body, the hair is included in that. So, and just, being mindful of people and who they are as individuals. I think it really matters. And, I believe we are going in the right direction, but as I said, education plays a big part of it. Being open and willing to have these conversations like we're doing here tonight is a big part of it. Spreading the word is part of it, and allowing people to be who they are. Just acceptance in a whole, I think is just what's going to help us move forward. It's unfortunate that we did need laws that to be put in place for things like this to be accepted. It's weird, but in the society we live in, I guess it was necessary. So as we go forward, hopefully it can be adopted on a national scale where we won't even have to continue having conversations regarding, having to cut your hair or being unkept or looking at certain hairstyles as less desirable than others. I have a story of a friend in Ghana, and he's planning to come to America soon, and he has locks. And he was just like, oh, I'm probably gonna have to cut my hair before I come to the US. And I'm like, why? And he was like, because I probably won't be able to get a job. And I'm like, you will, don't worry about it. But the fact that there's someone already in Africa that's already conditioned to believe that they will not be accepted if they come to America because of how their hair is kept. That is an unfortunate thought. You know what I'm saying? It is a misconception. It shouldn't be that way. So if we can recondition people to believe that no matter however they look or come, they will be accepted, it would be much better. I've had to personally recondition myself to let, the world know, myself know that any way I want to present myself when it comes to my hair, I am free to do that. But it took some time. And it actually takes a lot of self-love as a journey. As Dr. B said, she transitioned to a healthier lifestyle, and her hair was part of that. Even for me, I had to disassociate myself from thinking that, oh, I have to get a perm. My hair will fall out if I put a perm. It's really bad. So it's just like I've lost a lot of hair because of perms. So just allowing myself to realize that it's okay. I don't have to have straight hair all the time. I will say I really love my wigs, so I'm not going to stop wearing them. But yes. Does anyone have any questions?
A question. I'm trying not to get emotional. I'm thankful to be part of this panel, but it's been a journey for me when it comes to hair, going all the way back to childhood, being in a predominantly white private schools, and just different experiences with feeling like a spectacle, with different types of hairstyles. Can you talk about, based on your research or even your experience of people you may know, when they're in a school setting or even a workplace, if it's okay to give a compliment of someone's hairstyle, but when you make it like a big issue, like they're like a showpiece.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that in terms of how people should be a little more sensitive?
Yeah, so again, I feel like the conversations are okay to be had, but if to start the conversation, don't ask for it to touch, that's not how we started. Just like, oh, I like your hairstyle. Tell me more about it. Like, I know a question I always get is, how long did that take to do? And it's just like, that's always the conversation started. And I don't mind that, we have those conversations and it's easy, it's fun, it's lighthearted. But just being respectful again of people's boundaries and sensitivity. Like some people honestly do not want their hair, they don't want to be touched, they don't want to be made a spectacle of. And I come into the office all the time with different hairstyles and people are always in awe of them, but they also respect my boundaries. And I think that it starts from youth. I know that from a young age, I felt that I had to be less of a spectacle, especially when it came to the beads, like, oh, I'm too loud, I need to be quiet. And so if I see a lot of people doing this now, like on social media, and it warms my heart where they're telling their kids, like, your hair is beautiful. It is so beautiful. And just having those conversations where you're just reaffirming, letting children know, letting people know that they are beautiful in their most natural state, them as a raw person. I think that really embeds that identity, that self-identity and appreciation for who you are from a young age. And sometimes I really wish that was my experience where it was embedded in me from a young age that my hair was acceptable. Because I know like Easter Sunday was a big thing. And I remember I couldn't wait to go to the hair salon so I can get my hair pressed like with a hot comb, and they would literally fry your hair, but I'm just like, yes, I get straight hair. I'm going to be so cute because I have straight hair. But if someone had told me, hey, your little kinky twister, so they're twisted hairstyle, sorry, I'm getting really loose up here. But if I was told like, your afro is so cute, I would have been just as happy, but more people associated beauty when I got my hair pressed. And so again, it's just with that conditioning from a young age and letting them know, but especially in the workplace, just being respectful of people and their identity, who they are, including their hair, is the best step.
And just to add to that, in terms of schools, like we have to change policy because we have these archaic school policies that, hey, hair has to be uniform. And we've seen how that has worked out in the news where kids are told to go home, like what happened to you? Kids are told to go home because I guess their afros are too big or their afros are not according to school code. Then what is the problem? We need to change those school codes and those school policies.
Any other questions? I find it hard to compose myself. I'm so bombarded with emotions just from your amazing vulnerability, Nickey. Thank you so much. Thank you. Guys, you have questions for Ms. Kollie?
How do you feel about non-people of color wearing hairstyles we get shamed for?
That's a tough one because it comes to the idea of identity and self-expression. So it's just, we have been picked on, discriminated against for styles for so long. So when you see other demographics taking it on and creating it into, let's say, a trend or whatever, it's offensive. But at the same time, I personally don't want to police on someone on how they try to identify. So there it comes to, I guess, personal opinion, I suppose. Again, it's a hard place for me to speak in because I am all for expression, express yourself how you see fit, but in a respectful manner. But it's just like respect, it depends on the person, how they receive it. Everyone receives it differently. So I know that so some people that wear these styles, they have a lot of friends that are people of color, you know what I'm saying? So within their social groups, it is accepted and it's fine. No one in that group is bothered by it, but they might enter another space where people will be offended by it. So it's just like, now who is right and who is wrong? So it becomes something that's more based on opinion. For me, that is, again, it's hard for me to get angry at it unless I feel that we're being made a mockery of, because there are some cases where things are a mockery, where people kind of, what is it called when they try to, it's culturally appropriate, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like you kind of take on a new identity to be part of a fad, or you know what I'm saying, or to try to get into another social group. When the cultural appropriation starts, that's when I find it offensive. And it's just like, sometimes the conversation needs to be had like, hey, what you're doing it's out of line. But at the same time, there are some people that just do want to try something different, and they do want to have, there's a conversation, to be honest and open and frank. So it's just like, there's a conversation where it's just like between, people of color and white people, where it's just like, well, you guys wear wigs, and it's just like, is that not cultural appropriation? Or, okay, well, a Black girl is wearing a blonde wig, so isn't that cultural appropriation? But you can go to Africa and you'll find blonde haired people. It's not uncommon for someone to be blonde. It's not uncommon to see an African with blue eyes. Those things happen, so it's not necessarily cultural appropriation. Or you can hear people talk about, and there are European cultures that also wore braids back to the, I don't want to start talking about people's tribes and I don't know, like the Celts and all that stuff. I don't know y'all history like that, but those are also things that happen. So I feel like that's a toggle for me, because again, there's so many ways to identify, and I don't want to be the person to police someone's expression, just like I am asking people not to police mine. So it becomes one of those things. Yeah.
Just to add to that, those conversations might be opportunities for education. So not so much of policing, but understanding why someone is, maybe wearing that hairstyle. And if they don't know the roots of it or the significance of it, maybe it's an opportunity for a conversation, again, for education.
I have an 11-year-old niece, and she has very thick hair, and she has two sisters with very straight hair, and she wants to be like her two sisters, her hair. And she always complains, no matter what we say to her, oh, you just got thicker hair, your hair is beautiful, don't worry about it. She still feels, you could see the how different she feels. What could I explain to her?
Again, just reaffirming the beauty. I know it's harder, it's easier said than done, but also representation matters. I believe when people can see themselves in other people, it helps, for instance, like when it came to like dolls, for a long time, everyone always had white dolls. So they associated the beauty with what a white doll looks like, what Barbie looks like. But, as generations moved forward and Black dolls started becoming more prevalent, people started accepting that, like, wow, there's a doll that looks like me. So I honestly believe if, she can be exposed to people that are looking like her, so she understands that all of these looks are acceptable. You know what I'm saying? My hair is just as beautiful as the next person. Is really teaching self-love from a young age and letting people know, like building that confidence, the affirmations, constant affirmations. I will say in my career, this is not about hair, but it's more so about career. It's just like, I would say I'm an anomaly. Like in my job, like I'm a Black woman. I am surrounded by old white men. Literally, I'm always the only Black woman in the room. It's always the case for me. And so for a long time, I've always felt that like an imposter syndrome almost, right? Like I wasn't accepted in this group. But I will say about my employer, he was always somebody to give me positive affirmations, like you are great, you are smart, you are supposed to be here. The reason you're in this room is because you earned it, you deserve it, no other reason than that. So, and he was constantly pushing me into like just feeding that into me. And at first it took me a long time to really adjust to that mindset. Now I can walk in a room and no one can tell me nothing about anything. Like I already know I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but it took some time for me to get there. It did. And so it may take some time for her to get there, but those affirmations after a while, when, repetition is how people learn. So it's like the more she hears that, the more she continues to see that she's going to develop and grow into that self-belief for herself. So I believe that you should just keep on doing what you're doing and not just hearing it from one person, but making it a thing where it's just like the family people around her, letting her know like, hey, you are beautiful. I love your hair. Like even just a simple, I love your hair today. It looks so beautiful. You know, those little things, they start to just really stick with you. And you become more comfortable and it becomes your identity once you believe it for yourself. So that's my suggestion.
More questions? Thank you so much, Nickey. Thank you. I think we can agree she is the next best thing since sliced bread, right? Our next speaker is Mr. Joe Glenn. He is a proud native of Victorville, California, a U.S. Navy veteran, an educator, and an Albertus Magnus alumnus. Yes. Mr. Glenn has a passion for public service and addressing disparity in the public education arena that diminishes Black grandness. Those are the words. And he's going, yes, and he's going to speak tonight on the importance of barbershop in the African American community. Make him feel welcome, guys.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? For sure? All right, for sure. All right. I'm very, very grateful to be here. Thank you, Doc. Dr. Singh. So the barbershop. That's where you don't feel alone, even where nobody knows your name. And where you can speak freely in your mother's tongue and glean insight from the wise. You see, the barber, he's wise because he listens. And in the Black community, the barber has been a major facilitator of community. So in my experience, my earliest memories of going to the barbershop with my dad in Victorville, where I'm from, you heard it. But we went to A&A Barbershop, and that's the Black barbershop back then when Victorville was still a much smaller town. And you walk in and the atmosphere is very welcoming. And you see the brothers, and you see the old timers over playing chess. You see the newspaper stand, you see the magazines, and you're taking it all in. And the discussion, the jovial nature, how they're getting along, what they're talking about at that time going a lot over my head. But I appreciated the experience. And as I got older, my parents separated, the barbershop took on a different type of a role for me. Because this was a place where I would be exposed to Black manhood in the absence, or at least the physical absence of my dad. And there are certain things that you need to see in person to kind of absorb. When you see somebody else that you see yourself in, things resonate. The messages that they give to you, they resonate a little bit differently. But, matter of fact, before I move on, later on in my 20s, when I was pursuing my career of being a rock star and rap star, now I just call myself a poet. But back then, when we wanted to do a cypher, which is an event where you get rappers and they all kind of take turns rapping at the same time, there might be some music, there might not. But when we were looking for a place to host this event, the first place that we thought about was this same A&A Barbershop. And they welcomed us with open arms to conduct this event, and it was a great success. So now that I'm here and having the opportunity to speak on the importance of barbershops in the Black community, I think that it is noteworthy to reference that point. But with that being said, it was not always the Black man's sanctuary or the Black man's country club. And in preparing for this opportunity, I learned some things that I was not prepared to learn about the history of Black barbers and how we actually got to this point. If I were to choose a symbol for Black America, I think that the barber's shears and shaver are great, are definitely fitting. Because the barber embodies our entrepreneurial drive and our desire for self-determination through hustle and excellence, through hustle and excellence. And people like Alonzo Herndon, he started his empire through barbering. He started off initially as a barber, and he expanded. He partnered with one person to co-own a barbershop, excuse me. And then he expanded to 3 barbershops. Then he purchased lots of land, and he started an insurance company, a life insurance company in Georgia. And John Merrick, he did the same thing in North Carolina. So this shows that barbering, the trade, it was a means of economic mobility, but also it was an avenue to get into other types of business, right? But their excellence, it was not met without resistance. So there were barbering unions who lobbied saying, hey, we got to get some licensing, some credentialing. We need to require credentialing in this barber trade, because they were very, very good at it, and they were barbering, grooming white patrons. And white barbers, members of the Journeymen's Barbers International Union, or Journeyman Barbers International Union of America, that is, they successfully lobbied for the incorporation or for regulation in the form of licensing. And the problem was that the Black barbers could not attend any Black or barber colleges. So now they were locked out of this business that they had kind of carved out a niche for themselves in. It's also noteworthy to address that before these pioneers that we just discussed, most of the Black barbers, they were slaves. Okay, most of the Black barbers were slaves. And in fact, in the South, this was particularly appalling for me when I was reading and learning. It's like, okay, that if a slave had barbering skills, he could be leased out to groom other prominent whites. Moses Brown was a barber, or a man who was born a slave, and he was a barber. And through barbering, this is in South Carolina, this is a unique story because he was actually able to earn compensation. But through barbering, he was able to purchase his freedom, and then he recruited some apprentices. And then the next generation, his son, continued to expand his empire, but his son employed the use of slaves. So they were Black slavers, right? And it made me think of whether there's a parallel between Black slavers and their capitalist reasoning and present day Black capitalists' opportunism that exploits the vulnerabilities of Black people. So at what point do you draw the line and say that money is not a good enough reason to do evil? And in a modern context, we see these types of evils perpetuated in the entertainment industry. But I just felt like it was important to make that connection. Because residency in that time in a laissez-faire American capitalist society is not a good enough justification for evil. Right? Okay. And plus, like the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's important for us to remain mindful of that our religious faith does not justify it. All right. And in the North, Black barbers refused to cut hair for Black clients. So they operated white-only barbershops, and Black patrons were actually not allowed to get their hair serviced in many barbershops. Even the Honorable Frederick Douglass was denied service at a barbershop. He was furious, reportedly. But the Bible says, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love and honor, giving preference to one another. So as we reflect on these things that happen, we can't look at it and not recognize the wrong that was done before. We have to recognize the wrong and commit to not making those mistakes and not dishonoring the people who have went before us, but honoring them by learning from their shortcomings. While capitalist reasoning may attempt to justify such business behaviors, there is no doubt an opportunity cost that undermines the collective esteem of Black Americans. So it's important for us to esteem each other, and it's important for us to resist our capitalist impulses if it calls us to undo the well-being of our brethren. Henry Morgan founded the first national chain of barber colleges in 1934, and that ushered in the more congregational barbershop atmosphere that we see in pop culture, like in the movie Barbershop or in Coming to America. And this, at this point now, it's been about 30, 40 years since these licensing practices have come about. And now the brothers are in the shop and they're expressing themselves. And they're expressing their discontentment with many of the things and that going on, and being home in a place that does not happily receive you and your efforts. And through that, great networking opportunities came to exist as well. Barbershops were places where Blacks could be free from the ear of their oppressors. And that's a comforting place to be in, where you feel like you can talk and not be judged, or you can speak and not be judged. Which one is right? Anyways. But it was so much a place of discussion that the FBI was even spying on the brothers in the barbershop to get the real. To get the real, for real. But anywho, that's a brief recap, discussion, summary, whatever you'd like to call it, on the importance of barbershops in the Black community. I'm open to all of your questions.
Now you know why we had that Joe is an educator. I feel like he's given us an education, right? I learned something I didn't know.
About that.
A couple of things I didn't know. I hope you feel the same way. Please, there are questions at home.
Well, to all of you prominent educators out there, it is my dream job to be a professor. So hey, any openings, holla at your boy. But go ahead. Oh, thank you. Yeah, anybody?
Yeah, I'm gonna start off. Is it true that some people have a longer, more stable relationship with their barber than they do with their romantic partners?
Absolutely. And you know what? One of the reasons I think for that is because these brothers is getting advice from the barber. That's the problem. No, I think that's definitely the case, but you get a good barber that understands your hair and understands you, and you want to stick with them. You feel comfortable with them. You feel comfortable sharing things that you might not share with other folks, right? Because that's your barber. It's almost like a attorney-client privilege. There's a privilege there. And you know what? Sometimes, when you go to the barber, you get a jewel, a wisdom jewel that he'll just drop on you and be like, man, where'd you get that, man? I gotta tip you well for that one, man. Woof, I'm thinking about that weeks later. So it's all of those are factors into what keeps the barber-client relationship going, for sure. And then you'll have kids. The barber will cut your kids' hair, know about your kids, know what school they're going to. It's community, the essence of community.
Joe, can you speak about today, why in today's society with the Black barbers, how they're very integral part of our community in terms of knowing what's going on in society, in the town, or in terms of whatever's going on, how being in a barbershop, how it's very integral.
You know, thank you for asking that question. That's a great question and something that I can speak to personally. Like me living out here on the East Coast, and as you saw, I'm a proud native of Victorville, California, you know. And I started this hat company representing where we're from, the high desert. But I live here. So who has their ear to the ground? Who has their pulse on the community? I had to call up a good old time friend of mine, Mr. Ambition, William Wormley. That's what we call him. We call him Mr. Ambition, which I think is fitting, especially considering this discussion on barbers, barbershops, and what they do, what they're involved in. And sure enough, without hesitation, I said, hey, I'm trying to push this line of ball caps for people who are proud of being high desert residents like ourselves. And he said, yeah, we put them on display here. We'll put them on sale there. So that's just one example of how important the barber and the barber shop is. He or she ties the community together. Folks that I don't know, this person knows. Hey, Ambition, can you get a hold of the mayor? Want to get some ball caps to the mayor? No problem. You know the owner of this restaurant. You know this city councilman, this teacher. So the barber is a very, very important human being.
I had the honor of this past Saturday going to a Black affair at Cascades in Hamden, and it was Black beauticians and barbers throughout Connecticut. And they honored people that were not just great stylists, but their civic duty in the community. And it was just a beautiful experience. This is the second year they've done it. And this year they united with the Latin community, with barbers and cosmetologists and estheticians throughout the state of Connecticut. And it was just a great experience to be around that.
Sure, they really lead from the middle. They absolutely do.
Any other questions for Joe? I think he left us with a lot to think about. Yeah, Ross.
So I really like the way that you were talking about this sort of social solidarity that comes from being a part of that culture. And I was just sort of thinking back, there was a man, I think his name was Michael Hampton, and he was a barber who lived in Minneapolis. And he actually started giving free haircuts across the street from the George Floyd Memorial in Dinkytown, Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. Mm-hmm. And that became a really big community expression to help that really local community in that section of Minneapolis kind of process the grief and trauma of that event, build community around that event. So I'm just wondering, is there some kind of, is there a history of maybe the way that barbershops have been positioned to respond to social events or social uprisings or things like that? Like, is there some kind of connection between that?
Well, I think that the real connection is with your personal esteem. You walk a little taller with a good haircut. You feel better about yourself when you look in the mirror. And I think that that's what it really comes down to, especially in the aftermath of George Floyd, the devastation in the community. And to find beauty in themselves, find beauty in looking at themselves and seeing that things are a little bit of normalcy, finding a little bit of normalcy there. And that's not to mention the conversation that you have with said barber. And the barber grows immensely in wisdom by performing that service.
Question to you. Thank you. I'm wondering if the beauty salons and the barber shops, how do they differ from each other? How are they same? How if the hold of community in both the places the same, similar, different? If so, how do they differ?
I'll handle that for you. So, they're very similar in the respect that it is, it's the home away from home where you can go and have those conversations, just like the men are discussing whatever they need to hide or keep from their girlfriends and stuff, whatever Joe's hiding. It's the same way we go there and we get the wisdom. I remember, like I said, going to the salon on Easter for Easter Sunday and whatnot, and being around all the adult women and listening to their conversations. I would get so excited to go to the salon just so I can be with the ladies and hear what's going on and hear the gossip, because a lot of gossiping goes along, but also just being involved in the community and what's happening in the community. And a lot of action takes place there. Like historically, people would gather at barbershops and beauty salons and start to build coalitions, or, that would be their safe place to gather and converse about the things that they were going to do to take action against whatever oppression was happening at the time. So they are safe places where, people can actually let their voice be heard and share stories and opinions. And I have a friend that owns a beauty salon in Virginia, actually, and her husband owns a barbershop and she owns a beauty salon, and they're next door to each other. So the content is actually really nice. It's really beautiful, but it's the same idea. It's just one is the safe space for women and one is the safe, or whatever you identify as, but it's a safe space where you can have those conversations and be free to, talk in a space where you're not judged and you're understood and you're able to have, free conversation. So I believe that they're interchangeable. They're pretty much the same.
Also, I just want to add to what Nickey said. It's a place where for self-care, because sometimes when you're a very busy person, you're very active, whether it's school, family, activism, whatever you're doing, sometimes you lose track of taking care of yourself. And I know when I go get my hair done, it's a time for me to pause, for me to relax in my loctician's chair and share whatever I want to share, or she gives me the remote, I can watch whatever I want to watch. And I just relax. I don't think about a lot, or I may share things with her, but it's a place where I can do more self-care, because for a long time I've given a lot of myself and put myself last in terms of, self-care. I used to just throw my hair in a ponytail for many years, but I was like, okay, I'm getting a little older. The ponytail is not, fitting me anymore, so it's helped me a lot.
And again, like that roll up, when you look good, you feel good. You leave the salon, you feel like a brand new person. You're happy. And it's like, wow, you really did that, sis. It just makes you feel good. Like, yeah, you have magical hands. And like some salons, like some people, beauticians are known to have growing hands. So if you stick with this, beautician, your hair is going to grow because they know your hair. So it's that personal connection where they know your hair. So with Joe, it's like, oh, they know how to cut my hair. I come out looking good. And like me, I know they know how to braid my hair. They're going to protect my hair. They're going to treat my hair like they love my hair. And so it's that connection where it's just like, yeah, this person respects my identity and they want me to look good. They want me to leave here a new, happy, refreshed person.
Just to add, in terms of activism, there's some accounts that, especially during the civil rights movement, while the government could check on barbershops or spy on barbershops, they did not really think anything was going on in beauty shops. But then beauty shops became that place where movements could convene and get organized. So that, in essence, beauty shops serve that purpose as well.
Any more questions? I know what you're thinking. How could this get better? I'm telling you, it's about to get much better. Okay, our next speaker, Ms. Nkenge Hook, is from here. How many of you in the room is from Connecticut? She's from here. Okay, her roots run deep, and she loves her community. You've heard some of her heart, and she's going to share the rest of her heart with you tonight regarding this topic. She has a heart for serving at-risk community. She's pursuing her MPA here at Albertus Magnus, and she's studying with Dr. Birungi. Her hobbies include traveling, reading, and writing. And tonight she's going to talk to us about the cost of not going natural, relaxers, cancers, and other health issues.
Wow, the pressure is on. I'm going last. After all this great knowledge and intelligence that went before me. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Birungi and Dr. Singh for asking me to be part of this panel. Being that this is my second mod at Albertus, is really special, you know, to actually do something that's where I feel like I'm part of the community. You know, I've been to like a panel discussion when I was first starting here, but to actually be part of it, you know, I think it's the beginning stages of, you know, me adding my input and being part of this great community. There's a lot of information on the cost of not going natural, relaxers, cancers, and other health issues. I just chose to just focus on a few things and then tie in my personal experience of being natural as a child. My formative years, I was natural up until 13. And then it was like a lot of pressure. Like I've seen all my friends with straight hair and I'm like, oh man. So I'm gonna talk about my journey like later on towards the end. I did a little bit of research though, in terms of some of the risks that are involved when African Americans use chemicals repeatedly in their hair. This particular article I looked at was from the National Institute of Health. It was an article from October 17th, 2022. And it talked about the rise in uterine cancer in Black women due to the repeated use of relaxers and the frequency of using relaxers. Some of the chemicals that was discussed that are in relaxers, which I didn't know when I used to have relaxers for 21 years, are parabens, bisphenol A, metals, and formaldehyde. And how the frequency of using these relaxers, how it absorbs into the scalp, which cause burns, sores, and in some cases it causes lesions. They could be benign, but over many, many years of repeated use of relaxers, some individuals have developed cancer. Some of these lesions have become cancerous. Once again, this source is from the National Institute of Health and National Cancer Institute. Although uterine cancer is one of the rare forms of cancers, is very common in the female reproductive system. And I quote, "It is estimated that 1.64% of women who never use hair straighteners will go on to develop uterine cancer by the age of 70, but the frequent users that are at a higher risk, or at a higher risk, that same article says 4.05% of people that use frequent straighteners and relaxers are at risk of gaining cancer." This is a researcher by the name of Dr. Alexandra White, who's the head of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and Cancer Epidemiology. So that's a bit concerning, that big hike in percentage of people getting cancer, uterine cancer, due to wanting to wear certain styles. I'm all for choice. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and say one person should wear their hair a certain way, or whether you have it straight or whether you have it natural. I'm definitely for choice because I've had my hair in both ways. But at this stage of game, as Dr. Birungi mentioned earlier, I've made some changes with my health. So I also made changes with my hairstyle as well, due to the long-term effects of what relaxers did to my hair. It caused me to have to go see a dermatologist. It started affecting my skin, my scalp, hair breakage. I'll get to that in a little bit, about the pros and the cons. This particular study that I mentioned, they looked at 33,497 US women from the ages of 35 to 74. This study was called the Sister Study by this National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And their role was to identify any kind of risk factors in terms of health. Out of that number of women, they followed them for 11 years. And the result was 378 women were diagnosed with uterine cancer. I mean, although that's a small percentage based on the amount of people that they studied, I think it doesn't matter. If one person gets cancer, it's a concern. But there was a higher percentage of Black women that got cancer due to the frequency of using the straighteners. When you get relaxers, I'll talk about myself, you have to get them done on average 6 to 8 weeks. So just to give you some kind of idea of the frequency of when individuals get relaxers. In terms of straighteners, I know I've used that term a few times. What I mean by that are chemical relaxers, hot combs, flat irons. Inside the chemical relaxers, you have what's called lye, which the base ingredient of lye is, the base ingredient, it's basically, it's a chemical. So the base ingredient of it is, oh goodness, I forgot. It's, oh my goodness. Bear with me for a moment.
That's sodium hydroxide.
Thank you. Sodium hydroxide.
Shout out to
That's
Google.
in lye. Thank you so much. And that burns. That has a tendency to burn the scalp. Although when you go to sit in a hairdresser, they base your entire head with
Vaseline.
oh my gosh, I'm just
Petroleum jelly.
petroleum jelly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Even with that, your hair still burns. I know mine. I can only speak from my personal experience. Even though they base my scalp, and I used to tell the hairdresser, use extra, I still, with my hair would start burning immediately, which was very uncomfortable. But my mindset was on the end result will be my hair will be straight. It'll look nice. You know, it'll be acceptable. And I liked the way it looked afterwards. But after 21 years of hair breakage, it just, the ends didn't outweigh the means. The ends didn't outweigh the means because I went often. It was an all-day event. I would make like a 9 o'clock appointment and then get out until 2 o'clock because the hairdressers that I went to tend to double and triple book. It just wasn't a great experience for me. But similar to what Nickey was saying, when I was a child, my hair was braided. I had natural hair in my formative years. It was braided with beads. And when I would go to school, there was a lot of comments said about my hair, you know, and I just, at home in my own environment, I really loved the beads. I really loved the way my sister was styled. My sister was very gifted, my middle sister. She was really gifted. Every other week, she would wash my hair and braid it in all the different styles. And she was very gifted with styles. And I really felt celebrated at home. But when I would go to school, I didn't always feel celebrated because I felt like I was full of pride, Black pride at home. But when I went to school, I kind of wanted to fit in. I went through that phase where I wanted to fit in. And most of my friends were European and their hair was straight. And sometimes comments would be made about my hair. So in 9th grade, I took matters in my own hands. I was the youngest child, so I was one of those kids that liked to outsmart my mom. And so my first 2 sisters, they were more easygoing. So I would get, I think $5 or $10 every time my mother got paid, and I'd save my allowance. I saved my allowance until I had like $70. And I was like, Mom, can I get a relaxer? And she's like, no, you're not getting a relaxer. Why do you want a relaxer? And I was like, because I want my hair to look beautiful. And my mom, I never forget, she took me to the library. She showed me all different pictures of Black women and African women and shows different shades, because I went through that whole phase of, because I lived in a predominantly Black neighborhood in New Haven, but I went to Hopkins, it was just that whole dichotomy of the kids at home said they would call me white girl. And then when I was in Hopkins, I was told I was pro-Black, too Black, Malcolm X, all these different labels. So I went through a phase where I wanted to fit in. So my mother, she kept reinforcing, like one of the ladies was saying about how she was a niece. So my mother would reinforce me, like saying I was beautiful, or take me to the library, show me different books and magazines, just to try to break that, how I thought of myself. And as time went on, I started really embracing who I was, but I did sneak and get that relaxer. And I was determined, and I did. I came home. My mom was so upset with me because it's something about the intelligence of parents. I was way across the room in the kitchen, sitting at the table. And as soon as she came in, we lived in a railroad flat. As soon as she stood at the doorway of the kitchen, she saw my hair and she was like, what did you do? And so I started like trying to talk my way out of it because I was very charming. And she was so upset with me. As I became an adult, I didn't understand why she was so upset. And she said, because I knew I had to keep up with it. I knew you couldn't afford to keep up with it. So it was the cost. That's part of what I have to speak about. My mother back then, we're going back to the mid 80s. She was spending a good $70, $75 every 6 weeks as a single parent, plus giving a woman a tip. And it was very expensive, but that's what I wanted to do to fit in. So in terms of the pros and cons of having relaxers, I did share some cons. It's the health factor, health risk. In terms of the pros, it gave me a nice hairstyle. I got compliments. I felt accepted. That's the only pros I could think of. But in terms of, there's a lot of risk in terms of the repeated use of relaxers. There's definitely more education on it now than it was when I first started using them. But when I sat down today and was reflecting, I said, I can't believe I had them for 21 years, but I did. And after, I just got to a point where I got tired of my hair falling out. I got tired of the going to the hairdressers and my scalp burning, all the negatives just to look what I thought was beautiful. And 15 years ago, I chose to get my hair cut short into an Afro with the relaxer cut out. And I had to prepare myself because I had never had hair short. So I was like, my mind was thinking so negative. I'm gonna look like a boy. I'm not gonna look cute anymore. So all these different negative tapes was going on in my head. But I got enough courage to go get my hair cut. And I just had to learn how to embrace my beauty. It took some time because I wasn't used to having very, very short Afro. But I did experience going to a barber. I tried going to a hairstylist at first, but they didn't cut my hair the way I wanted it. So I was told to go to a barbershop. So I experienced barbershops for 15 years. I still go to get my eyebrows done. I still have my favorite barber. I don't go anywhere else but him. He has a staple in New Haven. He's been there for a very long time. So I'm just telling you a little bit about my journey. And 5 years ago, my best friend's mother came home. I visited them and she had this beautiful hairstyle. And I was like, what is that? And she's like, oh, these are sister locks. And I'm like, what are those? And her hair is salt and pepper. Miss Phyllis' hair is salt and pepper. And I just looked at the curl pattern because I went through those stages where I wanted my hair to come back, but then I thought about, I don't want to go through all that negative experience of going in the salon, being there all day, my scalp getting all broken off. And, I didn't want to go through that, but I also wanted my hair to grow back because it's all about choice. Sometimes you want different styles. So I looked at my girlfriend's mother's hair and she started telling me about sister locks. So I Googled sister locks and did some research on it. And it's a whole community. Like you can look up sister locks. It's certified people. They're all over the United States. And I started asking her mom questions about the whole lock journey because I've seen people take pride in locks. But I said, I would never do that because what if I don't want them anymore? I got to cut all, start all over. But here I am, almost 2 years, and I wish I would have done it a long time ago. I have one of the best locticians. I love going to her. It's a special relationship. I never thought that I would love my hair in its natural state. And one thing about sister locks, everyone's style looks different because it's based on how your hair grows, how it takes on a form of its own. So it's a very, very hard, I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm very thankful that I had a chance to speak to you all, and I'm just glad that I learned how to accept me for who I am and my whole totality, hair, body. I'm not crazy about getting skinny anymore. I'm just embracing myself, as long as I stay healthy, and I'm open for any questions.
I would just like to add to the experience of getting a perm and them telling you, just let me know when it's burning as an indicator that it's time to wash it out. And your scalp should never be burning or in fire. So I just want to add that so you know how bad getting a perm was for your hair. And I'll also add, like, during my journey, even with disassociating myself from perms, I would still perm my edges because I'm just like, okay, well, I don't want my edges to be nappy. That looks crazy. So it's just like there's just these little intrinsic details when it comes to hair and trying to be accepted, like down to just perming your edges so that they're straight and acceptable. So yeah, I get it.
Thank you for sharing that. I forgot to add that even with getting the relaxers, it has to stay in your hair for a certain length of time. And my hair was thick, so it had to stay in my hair for at least 30 minutes. But it was burning in the first minute. So you can imagine, I felt like I was on fire by the time, run me to the fire hose or something. But yeah, it was an experience. I'm glad I don't have to live anymore. Yes.
Thank you all for being here. Can you talk about the costs of wigs and weaves, one, and then two, the connection with a lot of that hair coming from Asia and that connection, if you have any experience or any of the panelists?
Say that one more time, please.
The costs of weaves and wigs, and then also about the connection with a lot of Asian hair being in the weaves and wigs. At least that's what I've heard.
I might need a little help. I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to tie in. Right. I forgot to tie in the cost. But in terms of my few times I've tried getting wigs, I broke out a lot. I mean, my dermatologist, one time I went to go in there for something else. He was like, nice hairstyle, but you can't wear that. I went in there with a crochet style. I was going to him for something totally else for my skin, my face. And he's really good. He looked at the tip of my hair. He's like, hairline. He's like, you can't wear that. But it is an expense. I've only had the experience of buying a few wigs. So I haven't really spent a whole lot on wigs, but I forgot to talk about the expense of being in the chair. I did write down some numbers of, when you go to the salon and how often, but I want your question to be answered first.
I'll tell you personal experience. It is expensive, okay? Depending on the quality. There's so many different things when it comes to wig wearing. For me, I will spend a pretty penny on a wig. Or just even the hair. I sometimes make my own wigs, but it's costly. You can be spending 200 plus depending on length, texture, and also there are a variety of different countries you can obtain your hair from. So it's they lie sometimes. They're like, oh, it's Brazilian. It's not Brazil, it's from China. But, sometimes, you can get Indian hair, Malaysian hair, Burmese hair. So there's a whole ton of different cultures that you can get it from. And the cost also depends on where you're obtaining your hair from. If you're getting it from China, you're going to be paying a little bit less than if you're getting it directly from India or something. So, I regrettably have spent one time like $800 on 3 bundles. That was crazy. Okay. I would never do that again because the hair only lasted like 6 months, which is ridiculous. But, also, you want to pay more money if you want better quality hair. Sometimes that'll last you longer. Sometimes your waves can last you for years. It also depends on how you keep it, because unknown to most, you have to actually treat the hair like you would treat your own hair that grows out of your scalp, or it will go to waste. So it's just like, you have to wash it, you have to maintenance it, you have to straighten it. So it's like, although it's not attached to your hair, you still have your scalp, you have to treat it, and maintenance it. So again, that could be costly, especially if you don't know how to do it by yourself. There are some people that may take it to a beautician to maintenance their wig, and that's another added expense. Or if you want to, if you don't know how to do your own hair, you go get it installed, you end up paying $300-400 for the bundles, as you would say. And then you go to a salon and you're paying an extra $400-500 for installation. It's really expensive. And now with inflation, let me tell you, it's crazy. All right? Everyone is charging. So, you end up paying thousands of dollars essentially just on the upkeeping of your hair and weave. So it's expensive.
And everything went up during COVID because of these businesses lost during COVID. So I hadn't gone to the hair, so I hadn't got my hair done in like 2 years because of COVID. When I went back, the prices, I was like, whoa, like it's like tuition, it's up there.
Yeah.
Like to start this journey, it was up there. It took her 20-something hours. So it's up there because it's like some of the prices I wrote down, they don't give you a finite price when you go on people's websites to schedule an appointment. It'll say starting, like to get a relaxer for the first time, $110. But that's based on the starting rate. So if you got long hair, it's more, so it's big business. Any other questions?
I got a question.
Yes.
Do you think that men's perception of beauty, Black men's perception of beauty particularly, contributes to Black women's inaccurate self-perception, as in to look at a particular natural hairstyle and not see it as beautiful?
Great question. That was part of my journey, because when I decided to go natural, I had a lot of pushback within my own family, and some so-called friends. The thing was, even strangers, I can't believe you cut off all that beautiful hair. What were you thinking? And then I had a cousin that, she's no longer with us, but she said I would never get married. I would never meet someone special because my hair, because I cut off my pretty hair. So it's really sad, where some people's mindsets are, because if you're not careful, all those voices, you'll start listening to that. And I did go through a phase, like for a long time, I was really proud of who I was in my skin and all that. But then I went through my phases where you keep hearing negativity, especially from people that's supposed to love you, you start believing it. And in terms of men, I don't think I haven't experienced, I can't remember. I haven't been in a relationship in a long time, but I'm not. You don't have a bad example, but
I think it does matter.
That's a great question. There are some women that they make changes to themselves because of what their partner may say, in terms of, I don't like short hair, I like long hair. I don't like natural hair. Can you spice it up for me and put on a wig, or, spice it up for me, change up your look? I was told that in my last relationship, but he's no longer in the picture.
I'll just add to that, Joe.
Yeah.
So I feel like preference really matters because I will say personally for me, different hairstyles attract different kind of men. All right, that's just my experience, right? So if I wear my hair in an Afrocentric way, I attract men that appreciate Afrocentric styles. And, and that's not all men's preference. If I wear my hair in this European state, I attract men that are attracted to those type of styles that don't mind wigs or, prefer straight hair. I'll never forget, there's this boy named Bobby in high school. Yes. And yes, he's Bob. He was Black, but he was just like, I don't like you because if you jump in a pool and your hair gets wet, it won't stay straight.
So that bothers me. That hurts my heart.
Yeah.
It does, but that's the same, that's that conditioning, because I heard that and I was just like, it hurt my feelings and it made me feel less beautiful in that moment, all because of his simple preference. I felt in that moment that his preference mattered over my own self-love of my identity. So again, it comes into preference, and again, that self-love, and like it depends on how you feel about yourself. Are you going to let someone's opinion of how you should look affect how you actually look, or are you going to stand in your identity and your expression and remain who you are? So I think it matters, but I do believe we live in a society now where things are heavily influenced by social standards, especially with social media, and how our youth are so heavily influenced by what they see or what they find trendy. And again, just.
But I think that aside from just the self-perception aspect of it, the sisters are married at a lot lower rate, so this has real implications. This perception of beauty and who you choose. Personally, as a Black man, I feel like there's a duty there. There's a duty to, at least to the best of my ability, make the Black woman or my Black female counterpart feel beautiful, and especially not less than beautiful. And I had conversations with people who disagree with that. So, but that's just my opinion. I think that it is.
You gotta have this conversation in the barbershop. You gotta tell them. You gotta tell the fellas.
Yeah.
Have them spread it to the community.
I keep it real with the fellas.
That's an excellent comment that you made. Now that I had a chance to think about it, when I chose to do online dating for a very short period of time, when people do the little profiles, and they put their preferences and stuff like that, that did come up a lot when people put their preferences of how they want a person to be shaped and how they want them to look. So it was a little irritable seeing that, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I did it for about a few months and I realized it wasn't for me. Because at the end of the day, whoever is for me is for me. And I just can't live my life to try to, I turned 50 a week ago, so I'm not going to change who I am. I'm in a whole different headspace than I would have been when I was younger.
Happy belated.
Thank you.
Ms. Hook, I just have a question for you in regards to the research that you discovered through the National Institute of Health, NIH. Were there any type of statistics in regards to men of color and relaxers? Women of color are not the only ones for centuries who have been getting relaxers. Men of color also obtain relaxers. And I just found that very interesting because I have been following this closely, that there has been no mention of men of color. And just at times, I just feel that women of color are targeted constantly in regards to themes of beauty and what is deemed beautiful. There was a very large study that was done, qualitative study, in regards to women of color were deemed the most unattractive of the female species on the planet. You can look it up. The scholarly review was very painful, a very painful review. So in regards to Joe, what you brought to the table, yes, there was very heavy discussion in regards to men and how women of color are viewed in regards to beauty, and they were not deemed beautiful under any circumstances. It's a very hard read. It's a very hard study to read, but I just found it interesting that I keep hearing about relaxers and the dangers, but nobody's talked about men. We don't have any stats. We don't have any numbers. We know that they're getting them.
Right.
Are they not also getting cancer?
Great comment. Great. That's great that you brought that up. That there isn't, I didn't see any information on that. But also you look at the media, media puts so much pressure on women, period. The different beauty and size and how we look, it's a lot of pressure on us, I believe, more than men in media in terms of body shapes, complexion, hair, all of that. So I think that also plays a part in it. But there is a need for research on that. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, we do need that research for sure, because we know during the age of Jerry curls, a lot of men were getting so just for that. But just going back to kind of Joe's comment, it's about socialization and society as a society getting away from that socialization of what beauty looks like. This socialization of standards of beauty did not just affect women. It's a whole societal thing. It affected men as well, what they consider beautiful. So as a society, then we need to shift, our minds need to shift as a society as a whole.
I think we have one more question. Patricia.
So this is maybe it's slightly not my interest, but we know that the medical community and how they treat Black bodies, they can sustain more pain. There's a host. The more Black women die in childbirth, and recently this question was asked on Twitter about why more Black women get uterine cancer or uterine fibroids, and and a lot of responses were about how a lot of these women are using hair products that are not good for them, except a lot of doctors chimed in to say that that's actually not the case. So I'm wondering if this it's a very easy thing to say, right? Like blame them for following certain norms that this Eurocentric society set them. So I'm wondering if this idea that relaxants are doing this to their bodies is actually not giving weight to real research that could actually find out the cause of these fibroids or these cancers that exist in women's bodies. And that the reason why this came up, because as you pointed out, that men are not getting, or there is no data on men getting these. So like, is this like a race plus gender bias that women specifically are bearing the brunt of? Look, you tried to follow our standards and you messed up and now you have cancer, kind of a thing. I don't know if this is true. I'm just curious what you think about that. Thank you.
You raised a very good point, because although I was reading that particular article, it wasn't absolute. It was like, yes, there's a higher adverse effect because Black women are using more, based on their study, they're using more relaxers frequently, but it wasn't absolute. You still have people getting cancer. So it wasn't finite, like that only because of the relaxers, they're only getting cancer. There is still a need for more money and research on getting more to the root cause of things. I believe you spoke a little bit earlier about that, about environmental.
Yeah,
Nickey.
Yeah, so there's different causes that can come up with cancer, but it's also important for us, I guess, to look at the samples. What did the sample look like? Was it mainly Black women? What percentage were white women as well? But yeah, it's important for us to just dig into those studies to really see what is going on. But you bring out really good.
If I can also add that because as you mentioned, there's been experiments done in African American bodies. I think the research, a lot of African Americans are not going to volunteer for these studies because they're very skeptical about research being done on them. And so that also skews the study. But I think for some of the research that's out there, there's definitely a connection between the chemical in relaxers and the occurrence of cancerous fibroids and uterine cancer. And also it does, as a few of the panelists mentioned, it does matter when you get your first relaxer. So some little girls are getting relaxed here, their hair relaxed at the age of 4, at the age of 5, at the age of 6. And if you've been doing that since you're 4 and you're now 24, it doesn't matter. All of those chemicals being burned into your scalp and then filtering down to the rest of your body.
My question is, you did talk about kids getting relaxers, and I noticed lately that they have started from the age of 1 to relax a baby. You know, I would call them babies because they're still babies, to relax their hair. And I noticed that it's a societal thing where they see that your kid's hair is kinky and that's a problem. So they've been relaxing the baby's hairs. My question is, I know that they only put for relaxers, but I noticed that it's also for hair coloring, because hair coloring has the lye in the product also. So while you're having that in your hair for a long period of time, it's also getting absorbed through the body. So, but my question is, when a lot of people have started the natural hair process, have you noticed more confidence in a lot of people? Like, have you gained more confidence yourself within that process?
Absolutely. Very good question. I had it when I was a child because my mother wouldn't put relaxers in my hair. So I had it when I was younger. But when I chose to be rebellious and sneak and get it, you know, this was the adverse effect. You know, I was trying to fit in with my peer group on what beauty was. And my mother was trying to steer me from that. And due to, you know, you can do the best you can as a parent, because she had me with all kinds of natural hairstyles. But when I went that route of having the relaxers and it having an adverse effect on my hair, you know, from the color, the breakage, the scalp, the all kinds of it being uncomfortable, you know, with the whole process, my hair started breaking off. So it did affect my self-esteem. And so, you know, I started buying wigs. I started, I didn't do it as a way of self-expression, you know, I was just trying to find myself, trying to find what looked decent to cover up my hair that was broken, what I perceived as broken. And so I started getting like the different braid styles and all that, adding on synthetic hair, going to the braid shops, and my texture of scalp and hair does not agree with synthetic hair. And so I was trying to keep forcing it, you know, going, even though every time it came out, my skin would break out for several weeks. So it was basically a journey for me. It took quite some time, but I'm glad I am where I am now, where I don't have that problem anymore. I don't have to go to a dermatologist or have burn on my scalp or have that whole process of, you know, my hair breaking off or me feeling that I'm not beautiful, you know, stuff like that. So it was a journey for me, but I'm glad that I made it back to, you know, loving myself.
I want to touch on a couple of things you said. So back to the 1-year-olds getting perms, which is insane. It's like their hair is barely there. But it's again ingrained in some people that, you know, straighter is better or whatnot. But it goes back to what I spoke earlier about when it came to skin color, where it's just like some people bleach their kids from young age. You know, I have a friend whose mother started bleaching her skin from when she was a child because she found her daughter to be too dark. So again, those Western ideals of beauty. And then your second point, when you mentioned about hair dye and it having lye in it, and it's just my own personal idea of this actually is a 2-part because it goes to what you asked and what you were saying, but it's just like viewing some things from a holistic view instead of just targeting certain groups. So it's not just Black women that get their hair dyed, you know what I'm saying? So these studies are only focused on one demographic when it should be studied in a macroscopic way, because it's just like, what are the rates of white women getting, you know, cancer, Black women, Indian, there's so many other demographics that are probably being impacted by the same thing, but we're just targeting one group at a time instead of looking at it from a holistic point of view. And even when it comes to the fibroids and things like that, yes, it's being shown that, you know, Black women are having fibroids issue for a long time. And, you know, those medical observations were ignored for a long time. Fibroids didn't just become an issue. There's been many times where Black women were complaining of pain and it was ignored, and no one was addressing the issue that fibroids could be a problem or how we can solve it. So these things, that sometimes it touches me because, when we talk about, environmental justice, social justice, all these different justices that are just pinned on one group at a time instead of looking at it from, again, a macroscopic, where it's like, how does this apply to everyone? How can we apply it to everyone? Yes, there are genetic differences between races. Sometimes, we're impacted differently by things. We have higher rates of sicknesses than others, diabetes, all those different things. But at the same time, we all need to have equal access. Once equal access is opened and given, then we can really start to study how things are impacting different people by these other attributes, whether it be race and gender. And so just opening that forum instead of just targeting one group at a time. Let's look at how these things are impacting everyone and break it down from there and keep studying it from there. So I think that would be helpful in actually making strides to a better and healthier society.
Thank you so much. Any other questions before we call it a night? Can we have a round of applause for our panelists, please? Have you heard of a more open, vulnerable panelist in a long time? I mean, they've not just shared the facts with you, they've shared the facts of their lives with you. We can't thank them enough. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us. And I'm gonna share a tradition that I have in my family. We get insulted when people come to our house and there's still food. So when you go, take food with you, please. Let the tables be empty, take food, because nobody else is gonna have it, okay? So have a good night. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you.